Okay, so we're continuing Perspective for Life and the discussions that we're having on relationships that relate to this concept of better together. So you've still got your list. I think this is about the third video with your list.
We're unpacking.
How are you doing?
Well, I skipped some questions.
Okay, good. the tough ones, I hope.
We just seems to wander a lot around. And I think we are finding a pattern here and overlapping.
Oh,
So I'm
really?
not going to.
Okay.
So there we go. So I'm want to talk about compromise.
Okay.
And actually, is that a bad thing? Very often we find this is kind of synonymous with loss. I don't think that's correct. I don't think we should see that. But what happened when neither of the partners want to compromise? I'm sure they have come to that point. I think that's the couples you're seeing.
That's stuck.
They're holding the position.
Right, correct.
I'm right, you're wrong, and I'm not ready to move anywhere, neither inch forward. And that's what we are looking right now. So the compromise does feel as a loss in that position. But actually, compromise is much bigger than that, and it can be used in a way defined better.
So define it better for me.
So compromise is actually prioritizing for me. It's really prioritizing at this point.
That's a means of compromise. It's not compromise itself. What is the compromise?
So what I'm going to give up on, really?
In many respects, yes. What am I willing to give up on in order to gain something? I'm not going to get it all, so I'm going to try and get as much as I can.
Prioritizing. I'm actually looking at...
But that's a means. That's a means of compromise and establishing what am I willing to give up on because I definitely want to make sure I get this. So compromise is when we don't agree on something, but we're not going to get it perfectly our own way. What we're willing to say is rather than both lose everything, let's gain something by giving up on something.
So I prioritize relationship over, so kind of win the war or the battle.
Correct.
So the battle for me, I kind of keep the long view here. Yeah. So
and that
probably
is
that's
one
where
of the
I'm
things
looking.
that one has to look at based on the things that we've spoken about before. That's a commitment. The commitment is, let's avoid the war. Analogy. I know it's a great analogy. The point is I might lose something right now for sake of the greater victory to come.
Or give something for the sake of. So it's not only lose. I think I'm giving more than I expected.
Sure. It's again, in many respects, remember,
allowing more than expected.
Relationships are going to come down.
Opening myself more to something
cost.
Yes. So there's some risk involved as well in compromise.
And that's the concern. Doubt. So let's think about it like this. We say, okay.
So they're stuck. None of them want to compromise.
That's the point.
What are we doing
If a person is stuck, the natural tendency we have as human beings is stuck is not a place we like to be. And there's a reason for that.
True.
We are wired in pursuit and preservation of maximal satisfaction, which means that we want to be making progress towards the things that we want. So when we're stuck, it means we're not making headway. We're not moving on towards what we want. And that is inherently uncomfortable. Why? Because in many respects, the brain is almost allowing itself to become uncomfortable to force a decision. So oftentimes, in an attempt to successfully achieve maximal satisfaction, the brain will even make us uncomfortable to push us in a particular direction as opposed to going around in circles or being stuck and frozen in a position. So when it comes to a relationship, we're at a stalemate. In essence, we're sitting with a situation where neither of us can maneuver, and as a result, we are stuck, as we've said. So what's the role of compromise?
Just to say something, I just realized compromise quite often, if it's personal, where there's a loss of self, I'm not going to give up on anything.
When we look at disagreement, again, if we were in agreement, there's no need to compromise. So compromise is by definition, again, there is something here that I'm going to have to acknowledge or concede. I'm going to have to give up on in order to gain something. In other words, I can't have it all my own way. And that's a challenging thing. Now, we recognize in relationships that we're not always going to have it all our own way. Why? Because we don't agree on everything. So we recognize that there is that giving part of a relationship. So compromise would be really, if you're looking at it from the mind map perspective, how do I resolve a particular problem? Whether it's I'm stuck, whether it's I'm unhappy, right? Well, I can just bail out and focus on the feeling. Well, then I ignore, I bail out, and we never get to deal with that particular issue, which is going to come back in the future. Or I fix the problem, right? That's going to mean I rightly need to understand what's going on, identify the issues, And compromise could well be part of a fix that includes the recognition that there are certain things I'm not happy about, but I'm going to have to accept. And that's where acceptance comes in. And acceptance is the idea that there's something that I'm not happy with and I'm not going to necessarily get, but I can't remain stuck in the situation. I'm going to have to find the release or the freedom to move on. So if it means I carry with me something I'm unhappy with, but I'm released to move on to other things that might potentially, I might find satisfaction, that is what in essence compromise is. So when we look at that, and that's also in the school community, there is a course, and I think it's probably one of the most important concepts of anything that I discuss with people is understanding what acceptance is. Acceptance is not something you do. Acceptance is the product of a belief. So if you and I are in a situation, you want that, I want this, what's the middle ground? Do we decide 50-50? Do we decide 70-30? How do we go about establishing what's reasonable? Now, there's some fundamental principles that we tend to hold to in relationships that I believe we think are useful for making sure that relationships are good and safe, but I actually think are counterproductive. And those are the kinds of things that I discuss specifically in Better Together. In many respects, also almost debunking these ideas that relationships are give and get or give and take, or relationships are 50-50. When we understand that those things do not contribute to great, lasting, safe relationships, that's when we would look at the situation and say, well, to compromise is actually a whole lot easier because I've got the bigger picture in view. And in fact, what I might choose to do then is I might be in a situation saying, I want this, you want that, but I would love to see you so happy that I'm willing to not even necessarily have any part of that. You can have it all your own way, because my reward is to see you satisfied with that. And that's the kind of relationship where we find ourselves giving preference to one another.
So couples who are stuck in no compromise, is that we somewhat stop caring or forget that we care? Or because how do we come into that position of, clearly there's a big threat in compromise. There's a big loss. There's some perception of loss.
100%.
And power struggle.
Power struggle. It's sometimes just selfishly,
so when
I want
the
what I
couple
want.
come to you and they say, no way I'm going to go with that, and the other person say, no way,
And people say that, and my response to them is, you're entitled to that position, but just don't think you're going to go anywhere.
Do they understand the cost? So
that's the point.
Why do they come to you anyway now? For you
They want it to be better. The simple fact of the matter is they have reached a stalemate. They've compromised as far. Again, you look at the multiple factors. I've given. There's nothing more that I can give, or I could give more, but it's not fair for me to have to give more to make this thing work. I've done that so many times, and the other person needs to step up. And oftentimes, both people feel the same thing, which is why when we recognize that we live life through that perspective of how things seem, again, you and I could be looking at exactly the same thing. Couples can be looking at exactly the same thing, but they're not seeing it the same way. And that is what's so important to have to understand. How do we find agreement?
So do you
how do
take
we
them
reconcile?
step out? So we don't talk about where do you step? How do you take them out of the position?
There are multiple ways
how
of
do you
doing that.
expand perspective?
Remember, in the pursuit and preservation of maximal satisfaction, there's one thing that we don't want, and that's loss. So there are multiple ways. So if I'm looking at the situation and I'm seeing that there's a particular struggle, that the probability is compromise is the only way forward, what you do is you point out to them that at the moment to stay where you are is lost both ways. Now, here's the deal. Sometimes people are willing to lose in order not to be defeated. And that's where one has to look at it and say, again, as much as this might seem you're giving up on your identity, you're giving up on your position, that's not the case, because, again, we're in this together. So we need to step back, reestablish what's the common goal here, right? So bringing back those 6 building blocks that I've spoken about before and unpack all of them, but oftentimes coming back and saying, what is the goal? Is the goal right now that you get it your way, I get it my way? What is the goal? The goal is that we get there. Well, we're not going to get there stuck. Sometimes it might just be a matter of, again, you know what, I don't want to argue. So let's do it your way. I'm not in agreement with how you want to do it, but I'm in agreement with the fact that you take the decision. I'll support you. I'm okay with saying to you, I'm not happy about that. Therein is my compromise. I'm compromising in many respects by saying I'll give up on having my part or my say in directing how we're going to navigate our way forward in this decision. But you step up, you take responsibility, and I'll accept that that in many respects is how we're going to move out of this situation because we can't stay here. So compromise is always an important concept. Why? Because simply we're never going to be fully in agreement. But if I can take the personal element out, which it usually isn't about, the likelihood is I'm going to be able to compromise and give preference to the other person much more easily. And in many respects, make the whole process easier. There are times when I will compromise on things very, very quickly because it's just not worth the cost or the battle down the line. So there are times when I'll accept many things that in reality I wouldn't need to accept. I could make a case for and I could argue. And I'm not talking about only in a relationship. I'm talking about service. I'm talking about things I've paid for. I'm talking about promises people have made. For me, I'm like, oof, as we navigate life with limited resources of time and energy and those kinds of things, very, very selective as to
You allocate them well.
Very, very selective as to what I'm willing to actually fight for and what I'm not. And there it comes to your word, priorities. Be clear on the priorities.
So I'm just maybe a naive question. So when people come to your office, I'm guessing they already have a solution. They would like you to vote for one of the solutions.
Sometimes.
Do they actually express that? Like they're stuck and they know, okay, if only the other person, not only accept, but they have a whole kind of plot, how would this play out?
When
and
that plays out.
do they come with a script?
Some. And that's oftentimes interesting when the person who's coming, hoping that they're going to recruit me on their side to make the other person change.
Does it happen?
It happens. Of course it happens. I mean, people will use whatever tools they have, right? When that sort of thing does happen, and the irony is I think the person who's trying to recruit me is not seeing it correctly, right? That is oftentimes quite difficult for that person who's coming in with the expectation that I'm going to see things the way they are, the way they're seeing it. And together we'll go ahead and get this other person to realize and make a change. What I always do in that situation is make it clear, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to show you how things are as best I can so that you can evaluate your situation. So here's what I'll say to you for sure. At the moment, do you think you are seeing this correctly and that you are right? Yes. Okay. Do you think you are seeing this correctly and you're right? Yes. Do you see it the same way? No. Okay, so we're back to the heart of the disagreement. Here's the deal. What's the goal? What's the intention? What are we actually dealing with? So I might bring them back to the detail, which at the end of the day is probably something they can compromise on quite quickly, but they are stuck on the personal element of defending themselves and their position, which is why at the end of the day it's so unhelpful to allow things to become excessively personal.
Do you explore how rational fears and threats are behind all of the
So I distinguish between two words. I distinguish between two things when it comes to trying to find alignment with something. I distinguish between rationalizing and reasoning. So that's a clear distinction I make on the mind map. Rationalizing, here's my version and definition of it, is when I go into my own perspective and I create, shape, work things to the conclusion that I want or that I think is correct or that I need it to be. Reasoning says, I could be wrong. Let me try and look at the facts as best I can, knowing I'm subjective and biased. But at the end of the day, seeing it for what it is beneficial to me more than it is me being found to be inaccurate or wrong. Because at the end of the day, if I'm wrong, that's not going to serve me. So if I'm willing to be reasonable, and that's what I encourage people to be, let's be reasonable here. Now, again, I might say in this situation, if this person compromises on that particular point in time, is it reasonable for us to consider that for them, that's a really, really big deal, and it puts a question mark over where they stand in this relationship and now they feel, second rate or whatever. Yeah, I can understand that. Well, what can you do? You can reassure them that that's not the case. So, no, of course not. And that's typically when they look at each other and they will come over towards one another. They'll put a hand, there'll be contact, there'll be touch. That's never what I want you to feel. They'll cry, typically, and there's that release and relief. Because in many respects, the thing that the person, again, was fearing having to give up on is that personal element, identity, position, role, purpose, whatever it might be. So when you can tease out through an understanding, tease out what's really in play through good reason, what we're able to do is very, very quickly find common ground, find, sort of compromise. Because at the end of the day, going round and round and round without compromise is costly in and of itself. Oftentimes they're like, you know what, I actually really don't care. You can have it your way completely, because it's just the relief.
That requires some confidence. I mean, obviously.
In what sense?
Security in self. I think there's a lot of power struggle, and then obviously that this will maybe reduce the value of self. And I think we how do I perceive myself and the other person? And I think giving up on what I stand in a way makes you stronger, gives you something that doesn't belong to you. I think it's a strange way of thinking as well.
Unfortunately, that way of thinking does tend to erode a sense of self-confidence and a sense of knowing self well. So I agree with you. There are times when one continually backs down for whatever reason. The brain is asking also, why? Are we wrong? What's wrong with us? The brain is checking these things all the time. And sometimes what ends up happening is the rationalized conclusion is, well, we're obviously no good. We're obviously not good at this. And that at least brings alignment in the thinking. But it's not necessarily a reflection of what's true. The alignment in the thinking is, well, the reason I don't get it my way is because I'm no good or not entitled or whatever. So again, it makes sense why you're not getting your own way, but that's not the real reason. And when we start rationalizing to arrive at conclusions that, again, seem to make sense, and now I start believing that irrational position, that's when those kinds of relationships start breaking down more quietly inside, because the person themselves starts eroding. And that you see. And unfortunately, that happens, and that could take years before, anybody's even noticed that. And oftentimes the way that'll present themselves is the person will say, I used to be so confident, I used to be so clear, but now, I don't even know who I am anymore. And that unfortunately happens. And it's very, very important as a part of the whole of Perspective for Life. Again, we use the mind map to make sense of self. In other words, to identify who I really am. Many people that I've seen have come to conclude things about themselves that are below what is in line with their true potential or their true, sort of skill, because they have literally, been beaten down or allowed themselves to be beaten down. Now, is the answer that they fight for their position all the time? No, because that's part of why the argument is there in the first place, is to be stuck, because now I can't allow myself to lose this again, because in so doing, I lose myself. All of that sort of interplay, we need to be able to point out and show how it's at work, why it's not reasonable or a concern, or why it is. And those are the things that in each case we work on. I think just
as we speak about, just not to simplify this. It's never that simple and obvious. And
you've got to be very careful of that.
And I think inviting someone like you, early on even, just to create some clarity and safe space and to introduce new ways, new strategy really, and something else to be tried. And to bring back novelty of understanding and all of this just builds a hope back.
Absolutely. And that's when a person sees that, we need hope. And when I define hope, it's we are looking forward to something. Not I'm excited about something, but I'm looking into the future and I'm anticipating something good is potentially coming. And knowing that is often what we require to persevere through the difficulties of now. The moment we lose hope, the brain shifts from the pursuit into the preservation. And that's when we withdraw. That's when we don't try. That's when we don't argue. That's when we just give up. And the point is, that is focused on the moment's satisfaction or minimizing loss. That is not what's needed to go ahead and make progress towards what is our goal and is our intention and what is enriching in terms of our relationship and everything that relates to
but
that.
then I'm going to tie up. I mean, obviously we have individualistic needs. We live together, and having this nice balance, respecting our own needs, but kind of living together and understanding. So how does that tie up? How do you help people really balance out themselves and their own needs with the living together and not going into conflict in this power struggle? Definitely, and constantly feeling your time is more valuable, your energy, your work, your schedule. I constantly keep compromising because, you need time. I'm at home and that kind of thing. But so I find this a little bit more with women. I think they're naturally, in principle, inclined to take care of. They give a lot to kids. I think kids, when they come to
Do you know why?
You're going to say by design.
By design, yes, but that doesn't give the explanation, Riley, correctly. It tells you where the source is. The reason is because women are inclined, in fact, and it's one of the things that I so appreciate and respect about women oftentimes more than men, is women tend to deal with their relationships, especially their children, for reason, not outcome. And that's one of the things I discussed a little bit earlier. In other words, for reason, not purpose. Moms will burn themselves out because they're moms.
Yeah.
They will not necessarily do that efficiently or produce the outcome they're looking for, but they will literally sacrifice because it's who they are. So what they're being driven by is the identity, not the outcome. Their identity is tied in with their purpose, and their purpose is they want what's best for their children. Oftentimes, this is a caution, a very important one, is when that becomes so consuming, oftentimes the husband falls out to the side and he feels neglected.
We have seen this, yes.
And when that happens, that's when that relationship erodes very, very quickly, because the husband can't argue that the wife's not doing something good. The wife is doing something good for the children. But the moment those children are seemingly elevated and occupying space and he's falling away, he comes to the conclusion that, my role is just to provide and to just do those kinds of things. So he loses a sense of value, right? In the relationship. I'm generalizing, but this plays out very often.
Sense of replacement. Yeah.
Intimacy is reduced. The natural tendencies to, sort of
all
drift.
The conversations are around the kids, for the kids.
Now the external factors are the biggest risk. Now the external factors where there isn't that safety of enjoyment within the relationship and the security of that core of the husband and the wife, what you find is that drift now outside, not even intentional necessarily. In this relationship, it might not even be there's resentment, might not even be that it's just each one sort of steps back to give the other one space to do what they think is appropriate. And again, wives for reason, husbands for reason, I go work and provide. I'm generalizing, but my point is this is how things typically will go ahead and play out. And those are the things we need to be aware of. Those are the things we need to recognize right throughout the time, right? We have to be able to prioritize. And that doesn't mean I give 100% of myself to every single thing in my life. That's impossible. But do I allocate timeously, carefully, my resources that give to add, and again, use the term, enrich the other person's life? Now, here's the deal. If I know that I can give something to my wife or even the relationship with my family that makes them happy, how does it make me feel?
Happy.
Immediately happy, because it is a reflection of the value I add. So in that situation where we have the opportunity to put the other person ahead of ourselves, right? That's a great thing, but we need one thing very important. We need some sort of acknowledgement and appreciation. The place where I see relationships falling down is there's give, 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 and the assumption is it's taken for granted, it's overlooked, it's not seen, and oftentimes
and discounted in the effort and time and intention.
That's the slippery slope to resentment.
Yes.
That there. So when I talk about relationships as being safe, when I get to that A part, it's very, very much aimed at, is this person attentive? Are they affectionate? Are they appreciative? Those are the kinds of things that bring together, really, really meaningful and good relationships. So in the whole mix
I'm going to add something that I find with the modern society becoming difficult. So we are in a highly overstimulating, kind of environment right now, at least in the modern society, where there's so much hedonistic pleasures we can pursue. And we are kind of have a feeling that others are doing it, we are not. And we distort a little bit our relationships. We feel there should be much more. I should be doing much more, and excitement and fun, and and I think it's compromises are now almost falsely built into us ability. We feel like we're compromising something that's actually not realistically even there. We're not even compromising.
Fair point.
It's and I see this with this fear of kind of loss. Everyone is doing something interesting. All my friends, and on kind of that 3D, what life is really all that noise is. But suddenly that's reduced to two-dimensional Instagram post. Look, they're on a holiday. Her husband is. We kind of take a little spy hole into their relationship.
And we assume the rest.
And we assume the rest, and we compare.
So
we have so much comparing right now, not to the real life. To the veneers of the life, really.
If you've identified that is potentially a big threat, remember, I've identified the problem, and that is a significant problem. And I've understood how that problem plays out. What's the advice that you'd give for people who are possibly looking from a difficult, challenging situation or relationship, looking out through the phone or whatever else to seemingly all these other great relationships? The point is, we see, by point of reference, we've got something less, and now I've got to figure out how I get there or why I can explain that. What's the advice that you would offer a person?
So interesting. So I'm gonna quite often ask, open my Instagram, okay? Mm-hmm. So and you look at it's like, how do you see my life? Okay. Mm-hmm. So, honestly, if you look at my Instagram, just like any other. So okay, fine. But I put only the moments of joy, right? I put only the things that I want to remember as well. So I'm putting there. It's almost like a scrapbook for myself. So why would I omit the repetitive? It's like in a fairy tale. We only get to the wedding. We never see a princess washing dishes, right? We never see routine. We never see mundane. We never see any of this. We kind of clear that up, and we only do, wonderful walks and deep talks and all of this. But actually, we lose service in the marriage. We just have fun. It's all fun.
Very good point.
And I think, we forget a little bit. And I step back and I say, I think I need to ask you, how do you define really love and relationship? Because because from those beliefs, you're building up all of these disappointments. So I'm going to so we go step back and peel a little bit more into what is guiding this really, the way you're assessing other people's marriages and why do you compare? And even that's not bad. What do you envy them? I asked them, that's great. What do you envy these people? And I asked them, great, maybe that's something to work on. You picked it up. You picked it up so well. That's what you want more in your life. Now, that doesn't mean they have a better life. You're just missing something a little bit more, right? It doesn't mean, so how would you bring that up? Like, try it. Okay, so they went on a holiday. Plan it.
Sure.
Plan a short something. Clearly, you're missing more, maybe time together. So do they have more fun? Is it playful? Is it cinema and all of this? And so something to look forward to. It's a wonderful thing, right? Bringing hope. Something to look forward to. So It's not that I want to copy someone's life, but envy or this kind of jealousy, we see, it's maybe a good checkpoint of what we would like to try and invite to our life, a little bit more of that color. That doesn't mean I'm going to continue, but it's experience and something to bring forward and have, interesting conversation. Honestly, you can invite anything to interesting conversation, because on Instagram, we're only inviting, by Instagram, I'm inviting only fun. Clearly I'm inviting traveling, great dinners,
So I would
great company.
I would take this end of the conversation and say, first caution, be careful of what you use as a point of reference.
Exactly.
Number one, that doesn't mean you completely cut
Don't-
out any point of reference. You might look and
Exactly.
say, well, that looks cool, which I really like what you said there. And then you can go ahead and explore that together. I think that those are good things. But when we recognize that oftentimes we are assessing life from the perspective, again, of points of reference that are not always reflective of the entire reality.
Yeah, that's skewed.
They are horribly skewed at times, but we consider them to be valid, and therefore we build the rest of the sort of picture from there. So I think the caution would be very careful of your points of reference. And if there are things that you think would add more fun and, sort of excitement to the relationship, ask yourself, what might that be? And as you say, it doesn't mean I have to necessarily spend the money to go on holiday. It might mean something simple. Here's something that I choose to do, okay, just personally. And I really only do it with my wife. I'll send her a picture of something. If I see something that pops up, I might take a snapshot of it and I'll send it to her and I'll say something like, well, wouldn't you like to have a hot chocolate there with me? It's just something simple that costs me nothing. She knows I'm thinking about her. Her response is inevitably one that, sort of affirms, man, I would totally love that. When are we going to do that? Something along those lines. So it's something that actually, because of, again, how the mind and brain work, the brain is able to enjoy things both in reality and in imagination. So sometimes we might just say, we can't afford to do anything, but imagine we could do this together. You'll be amazed as to how valuable that experience is, just in terms of bringing us together to find enjoyment in something we can share. And again, it was purely imagined. So
those random acts of kindness are just so wonderful.
I'm going to say, try that. If you're in a relationship that really is a struggle, and look at something that you would love to go ahead and do and share with this person, or even it's a memory from the past. Say, remember when we did that? I would love to be able to do that type of thing again.
And smile.
And leave it at that. Good. Thanks, Maliksi.
Take care, Ryan.